Well, I don't think we'll actually go after it unless we believe that it is. I mean, it absolutely is an overwhelming problem. This is the classic problem of the thing that gets the most use, the oceans, gets the least care. And we let things fall. And unless we really get that message seriously, we won't make the changes that are necessary. And we won't make those changes fast enough to help with the problem. The eastern part of the Pacific garbage patches, there are two of them, a western one and an eastern one. The eastern one is twice the size surface-wise of the state of Texas. So it's a phenomenally huge problem. And then the particles are anywhere on the surface to 40 meters below, and they're kind of spread out, as has been said, like a peppery soup. Don't really think we want to do the fisherman solution of just casting a wide net and just picking everything up in that area, because we're going to get a lot of marine life and things that we don't really want to get. For parts of it, we're going to need a more focused kind of solution that I think we can only do with machines or robotic devices that actually can sense what of the 13 or 14 types of plastic that it's encountering, and actually, in a measured fashion, pick it up and collect it, and or turn it into some sort of device itself that finds its way to sail back to shore. There's a lot of solutions potentially on the table, but I don't think we should wait in terms of, given the size of the problem and given the difficulty of getting these small particles collected. It's something that has to begin now. The vision for this company is to help to provide some of the tools and assemble the team so that and bring the teams together so that we can use the Industrial Revolution to solve the problem itself by producing machines that go out there and fix it. Instead of necessarily waiting for environmentalists and scientists to help fix this problem, we really should use the private sector itself to fix the problem. Tweak the way, otherwise the way we have it now, this problem is just an externality to the equation, and we need to change that. We need to add this variable back into the equation of how things run and figure out the economics of how we're going to fix it. They are not the engine that's causing harm to this earth. They are not the engine to make things happen on a massive scale, be it constructive or destructive or whatever your opinion. It's the private sector and the aggregate results of the behavior of the private sector that is producing the human, quote-unquote, human activity of interest that's causing a lot of our environmental problems. The residual consequences of technical things we've done in the private sector is just huge. And in this case, this is a simpler problem. A plastic bag floating off and ending up in the garbage patches. That's not as tough a problem as dealing with overpopulation in terms of how you might fix it. So in some ways, we're looking at kind of the low-hanging fruit. This is an easy symbolic one to say, if we're going to let all this waste kind of blow off in the wind and go off in the currents and end up in centralized areas, it then becomes not so visual, but a point of interest of which, and it tests our principles as to whether are we going to do something about that or not. And I don't think that's really an environmental question. I think that's kind of a mistake. It's kind of like, do we really need environmental scientists to study the results of setting off a nuclear weapon to decide that nuclear weapons are bad and that maybe we shouldn't do it? I suppose we could continue to study the problem, but at some point some problems move from needing further and further, deeper dive exploration to find out what the answers are. And at some point, you're never going to get perfect information, but you know enough about the problem to say, oh, at least we can begin cleaning up this problem. And maybe it won't be perfect, and maybe we could have done it better. But I feel like the environmentalists and the scientists they get involved in such a debate. I mean, it'll be 100 years before we ever get the results. And by the time we agree upon things, we might be 80 years past when we should have started. This is an easy one. We're just saying, hey, it's like if you throw a concert in Golden Gate Park and you leave a bunch of trash, hey, the people that made the money off the concert are responsible for picking up the trash. And I don't think that that's a difficult message for corporate America to hear at all. I think they're kind of used to that standard, and it's a little bit of an extension of what they were expecting. I'm not suggesting that we have to tax Coca-Cola. What I'm saying is there's actually an industry that we can create that will be related to recovery and fixing the earth, and we are going to unleash and deploy this industry. And it's Coca-Cola's venture company that would be interested in investing because they can make profits from cleaning up the earth, right? It's that shift that'll get us to move faster. Once we establish and show, just like a war makes profits for the companies that produce the infrastructure for war, it's the companies that produce the infrastructure to clean up the environment. They're going to make more than any war has ever seen because there's a lot we have to do. And there's so many things where I think we have tools where if we deployed them in a robot type sense, we could fix the negative consequences of humans being on Earth that we've seen in the last couple hundred years. A lot of these problems kind of trace back to the same shift. If we can take that energy that makes that could take a war and make that a private sector event, then surely we can take some of these larger problems like garbage in the ocean and make it a private sector event. So, capitalism and greed, the engine that we've made, kind of Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, produces an aggregate set of services is that's good for humanity. It's just might not have always been directed in the best of ways, or it might have consequences that are bad. But by itself, if you want to get, I joke with my son. I tell him, we'll pass a truck and it's kind of unmarked, an 18-wheel truck, and I'll say to him, do you think they're taking toilet paper to Montana? And I'm trying to explain to him sort of, the basics of macroeconomics, in that, look, if the people in Montana run out of toilet paper, the only solution that we have for it is that you and I will find out about it in the paper and we'll go, oh my God, we can rent a bunch of 18-wheel trucks. We could take toilet paper to Montana and we can make $100,000 in a weekend. You could try to solve that problem a different way. But what we found, what we call capitalism, is that there's a way to sort of jury-rig greed and taxation around the problem such that you never run out of toilet paper in Montana, and you never will. If someone will just connect the dots for them about how they can make that $100,000 in a weekend, and then they'll go, okay, let's use all our smarts and all our brain power and assemble the teams that are needed to solve the problem. Every summer we'd spend about a month out on the water fishing. And over time, I myself have seen the decline in fish that you can, we were always fished off of Montauk and Sag Harbor off the coast of New York. And over time I noticed, oh my God, after 20 years, there was this huge gap in the amount of fish you could catch. And so, I myself have seen the decline in fisheries based on commercial fishing. And, in and of itself, and commercial fishing is to feed people and whatever, maybe it could be done better, but our population's growing. There's another problem that I think, creating more ecosystems of healthy fish is something that if we're going to have commercial fishing, we have to be in the business of that. And somebody's got to find a way to make that profitable, right? A lot of these problems kind of trace back to the same shift. If we can take that energy that makes that could take a war and make that a private sector event, then surely we can take some of these larger problems like garbage in the ocean and make it a private sector event. I think I spent too much time watching Jurassic Park. I won't even confess to the exact number, but let's just say I watched it a long time, and a lot of times. And over time, I came to the opinion that, wow, it's kind of, how like in literature, there's always this idea of universality. And I started to understand, oh my goodness, the entire Earth is like a theme park. And that's where I had this kind of insight, this vision that, oh wow, like a private sector event we suddenly, if we shift and we think, oh, the whole entire Earth is a theme park, then we're letting it fall in decline. Then we need to fix it. Then we need to mass a bunch of investors to actually go after fixing the problem. We can tax the population to come up with the money to pay from jurisdictions about why we're going to fix it. But it's just a matter of shifting. It's what has me fired up is this shift in thinking of saying, well, yeah, if you think of it that way, we don't really have to leave this to the environmentalists or to the scientists to study the problem to say the theme park quality has dropped, but where we'd like to see, let's mask that up and fix it and shore it up in the areas where it needs to be corrected, and let's go after it with the energy of just like, hey, we make a choice. This is not a democracy. If the right people make the choice, we're just doing it, and by the time they catch us in what we're doing, we'll be well into trying to correct the problem. This Earth itself is something that should be preserved. The same way we wouldn't want to blow up a planet, 100 million light years from here, we shouldn't want to destroy this planet because we can see there's something magical going on right here. We've got to become the stewards of that magic and cultivate it and keep it going. I have a lot of hope for the millennials and younger generations. I think they're not so programmatically married to destroying this planet. It's kind of like the daylight savings time problem. There were so many ideas that they had about like, oh, we could produce, we could increase aggregate productivity of people if we would have them like go to work earlier, and come home later and not be so focused on whether the sun was up or not. And so they had all these tax incentive ideas. They had all these ideas that they thought about doing, but the idea that ended up sticking was not to talk about that at all, just to come up with the Daylight Savings Time Act and actually change the definition of time at the time that they wanted, and don't tell people why. And then, they got the bump that they wanted in the economy without, and I think it was Richard Nixon signed that into law originally. They got the bump in the economic productivity that they wanted, but they didn't get into the quagmire of the fight about like, I don't want anybody telling me when to go to work and blah, blah, blah. So that's where it doesn't always have to be a democracy. As long as you know you're working on the right problem and you believe in the morality of what you're trying to achieve, I think that, it's part of how we're trying to solve this ocean problem to not get caught up in the disaster of fighting over partisan politics. For profit because I originally thought maybe it would be a nonprofit, but then I realized there's no way a nonprofit's going to kind of muster the energy and the excitement in the marketplace to actually be able to get this problem done. That there has to be a way to structure it so it's a for-profit company. So this will get a whole nother set of investors aligned to the idea that, if we invest in a tools company to produce the tools to fix the ocean's problems, how much in spades will that come back to us as the jurisdictions and the governments wake up and realize, oh my God, we need these tools to help solve the problem. So I think making the tools is kind of, and making them in a way that can make money is a way that will draw the world's attention, and in a way, it's the same way the iPhone draws the world's attention. And when you unleash that kind of force on the problem, combined with, I hope, thousands of other companies that will get this message from all around the world and work with us, I think that's kind of the best way to muster the resources to go after this game. The crossover is just that there are a lot of problems like, oh, there used to be 12 trillion trees on Earth and now there are only 4 trillion trees on Earth and we need to plant 8 trillion trees. That the staggering nature of the environmental problem just has us like in a quagmire of inaction where we can't even decide on what step to take. I kind of hope that this problem will be and how we go about solving it will be a leadership example for maybe working on the fisheries problems or coral problems in the ocean or tree problems. And who knows, maybe we might decide to solve some of the tree problems with how we deal with plant life in the oceans. I'm not sure. But I bite my tongue because I don't want to say, oh, all of that needs to be studied. Once you say that, you kind of move the problem away from action and away from happening immediately. And, they're not going to stop making Coca-Cola bottles. They're not going to stop making iPhones. That engine doesn't ever pause. And I think that instead of thinking about it as an environmental problem, I hope what we're kind of proving out is that these problems can become private sector kind of issues. We need to give a name for this kind of activity, and we go after it that way, where we're kind of building the infrastructure and selling that infrastructure as a solution. And the residual consequence might actually be that some greater environmental good happens, but that doesn't have to be always put in everybody's face so that it becomes a dividing issue. I really think it's going to be about the initial teams that we assemble to actually go after this problem. They're just going to rock. I've assembled great teams in the past, and there's something so magical about it's not just saying, oh, I have 100 great individual resources. It's that 30 of them combined to something that they could have never done individually, and their aggregate kind of thinking power and transitive wisdom just becomes just incredibly awesome. And what you need to do as a leader is be able to gather those resources together, to inspire them to start to cross-pollinate and unleash them with an economic engine behind them. And that's how the iPhone gets built in the very beginning. The only shift here is, like, what if we were working on things where that had really great net good? It doesn't really have to just be about for profit only. It could also be about a net good happening too. And so you put those two together, this isn't out of the reach of what this area knows how to do well.